Welcome to our channel, where nothing stays hidden for long and every polished surface eventually cracks. Here, we dive deep into the stories that unfold behind closed doors, beyond gated communities, and beneath carefully constructed reputations. We don't just recap events, we explore the emotions, the motivations, and the dangerous choices that drive people to the edge. If you're drawn to dark secrets, emotional conflict, and the kind of drama that forces characters to confront who they truly are, you're in the right place. Stay with us, because once the truth comes out, there's no turning back. The day Vanessa's mother arrived at Fairmont Crest did not announce itself with spectacle, yet its impact rippled through the gated community with a quiet, corrosive force. The manicured lawns and symmetrical facades stood unchanged, but beneath the surface, something old and volatile had been disturbed. She carried herself with the controlled composure of someone who had learned long ago that survival depended on restraint. But behind that restraint burned a resolve sharpened by years of silence. Her presence alone unsettled those who recognized her, because she represented a chapter of the past that Fairmont Crest had collectively agreed to forget. The information she brought did not explode all at once. It seeped into the community through carefully chosen disclosures, documents that surfaced at precisely the wrong moments, and subtle confirmations that turned rumors into certainty. At the center of it all was a truth that rewrote the personal histories of several families who had built their reputations on respectability and control. The revelation was not merely scandalous, it was destabilizing, calling into question inheritances, loyalties, and the moral foundations upon which Fairmont Crest had been constructed. Vanessa found herself caught between fury and disbelief. The knowledge her mother revealed collided violently with the version of her life she had clung to for stability. Every achievement she had claimed as her own suddenly felt compromised, tainted by circumstances she neither chose nor understood. Anger rose first, raw and directionless, aimed at the mother who had withheld the truth for so long. Yet beneath that anger lay a deeper wound, a sense of having been shaped by invisible hands, guided toward decisions that no longer felt entirely her own. Vanessa's internal struggle hardened into resentment, not only toward her mother, but toward everyone who had benefited from her ignorance. Her mother, however, was not driven by malice alone. Years of watching from the margins had transformed regret into something colder and more deliberate. She had made calculations, measured the cost of silence against the damage of exposure, and concluded that the community's comfort was no longer worth preserving. Her motivation was layered with guilt for the life her daughter had unknowingly lived and bitterness toward those who had coerced her into complicity. Revealing the truth became an act of reclamation, a way to strip power from those who had wielded it without consequence. Yet even as she moved forward, she wrestled with the knowledge that her actions would inevitably wound Vanessa in ways that could not be undone. The shockwave spread quickly. Long-standing alliances within Fairmont Crest fractured as individuals scrambled to protect themselves. Some reacted with denial, clinging to procedural technicalities and legal defenses, hoping to outmaneuver the consequences through influence and wealth. Others responded with quiet panic, realizing that their own secrets were dangerously adjacent to the truth now exposed. The community's unspoken code silence in exchange for security began to collapse, replaced by suspicion and self-preservation. For those whose status depended on the integrity of lineage and legacy, the revelation struck at the core of their identity. A prominent family patriarch, who had built his authority on moral superiority and control, felt his carefully curated image unravel. His anger manifested not as outward rage, but as ruthless calculation. He sought to contain the damage by isolating the source, framing Vanessa's mother as unstable and vindictive. Yet every attempt to discredit her only deepened the scrutiny, exposing cracks in narratives that had gone unchallenged for decades. His internal conflict grew sharper as he faced an impossible choice: sacrifice others to preserve himself or accept a public reckoning that would erase his dominance. Vanessa's closest relationships began to strain under the weight of uncertainty. Friends who had once offered unconditional support now hesitated, unsure of where loyalty should lie. Each interaction felt transactional, measured against the potential fallout of association. The sense of betrayal she felt intensified, transforming grief into something corrosive. She questioned whether affection she had received was genuine or merely an extension of the privileges she now realized were built on deception. This erosion of trust pushed her toward isolation, where her thoughts spiraled between vengeance and escape. The mother-daughter bond deteriorated under the pressure. Vanessa struggled to reconcile the woman who had raised her with the one now dismantling her world. She perceived the timing of the revelation as calculated cruelty, suspecting that her mother's need for absolution had eclipsed concern for her well-being. Meanwhile, her mother grappled with the consequences of honesty, haunted by the realization that truth, once unleashed, could not discriminate between the guilty and the innocent. Her determination wavered as she witnessed Vanessa's unraveling. But turning back was no longer an option. As the community reacted, secondary truths began to surface, each one compounding the original shock. Financial irregularities, concealed relationships, and long-suppressed grievances emerged, creating a cascade of exposure that no single family could contain. The atmosphere in Fairmont Crest grew tense, conversations hushed and movements deliberate. Neighbors who once exchanged pleasantries now avoided eye contact, aware that any connection could become a liability. The gates that symbolized exclusivity and safety began to feel like barriers trapping them with their own sins. Vanessa faced a series of decisions that forced her to confront her own values. Aligning herself with her mother offered the possibility of reclaiming agency, but risked complete social exile. Rejecting her meant preserving a semblance of normalcy at the cost of perpetuating a lie. Each option carried consequences that extended beyond her own life, implicating others who had never asked to be part of the conflict. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, fueling a growing sense of rage at having been placed in an impossible position. Her anger eventually crystallized into resolve. Rather than remain a passive casualty, Vanessa began to act, using the very systems that had once benefited her to challenge those who sought to silence the truth. This shift unsettled both allies and adversaries, as her actions defied expectations. She no longer fit neatly into the role of victim or beneficiary, instead becoming an unpredictable force driven by a desire to reclaim control over her narrative. Yet with each step forward, she risked alienating the last remnants of stability in her life. The mother watched this transformation with conflicting emotions. Pride mingled with fear as she recognized her own defiance reflected in Vanessa's choices. She questioned whether exposing the truth had been an act of justice or an attempt to rewrite her own failures. The community's escalating hostility reminded her that survival often required compromise, and she feared that Vanessa's refusal to do so would leave her vulnerable. Still, she could not bring herself to intervene, knowing that shielding her daughter now would only perpetuate the cycle of manipulation. As tensions reached a breaking point, Fairmont Crest became a place defined by reaction rather than control. Decisions were made hastily, driven by anger, fear, and desperation. Some sought legal retaliation, others social annihilation, each move escalating the conflict. The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred as individuals justified harmful actions in the name of self-preservation. The community's polished exterior finally cracked, revealing a network of mutual dependence sustained by collective denial. In the end, no one emerged unscathed. The truth Vanessa's mother had carried for so long proved too heavy to bear without consequence. Relationships were permanently altered, reputations dismantled, and futures redirected. Vanessa stood at the center of the storm, changed by the knowledge that identity could be both inherited and stolen. Her anger remained unresolved, tempered only by the understanding that some wounds could not be healed, only endured. Fairmont Crest, once defined by its gates and guarantees, was left exposed. The revelation did not bring closure or redemption, only a stark reckoning with the cost of silence. and as the dust settled, it became clear that the community's greatest fear was not the truth itself, but the realization that it had been living beyond the gates of honesty all along, sustained by betrayals that could no longer remain hidden.